Hello guys, this is Aniruddha here from GeeksforGeeks, and in today's video we will be again continuing with the component life cycle of. So in today's video we will also be continuing with the components life cycle. Again we will be discussing some important methods that are mentioned over here. The first one is get derived state from props, and the second one is get snapshot before update. So if you're not aware of the component lifecycle methods, I would recommend you to see the video that went live yesterday, in which we have discussed the most basic and fundamental component lifecycle methods. That is the component did mount method, component will unmount method, and along with that the component did update method. So these were very important methods that we have discussed in the last live session that was done yesterday. So please go through that video to have an understanding of each of them and when they are called and how they are implemented. In today's session, we will again continue the topic, in which we will again be discussing two new methods which are very important uh, during the life cycle of a component. So the first one is get derived state from props, and the second one is get snapshot before update. So these are the two very important methods about which I will be elaborating and discussing with you in this video. Again, to make it more meaningful, I will be implementing these methods using class components, and I hope that after this video, you will be having a very good understanding about both of these methods. So let's continue with the explanation. First, we are going to see what this method is all about, that is the get derived state from props. So first let's see or have a deeper understanding about this method. For that, let's move to the next slide. So over here, you can see a diagram that says, or which is labeled as life cycle. In this diagram, there are three things that are mentioned over here. First is mounting, the second is updating, and the last one is unmounting. So these are nothing but the three phases in which the component in a React project exists. About these phases, I have discussed in the last video. In today's video, we are going to see about this particular method, that is get derived state from props. So in mounting phase, first the constructor is, or the constructor method is called. After that, this method is called, which is get derived state from props. And after that, rendering is done. And finally, component did mount is called. So we have seen about this method in the last video. Along with that, we have also explored this constructor method, how it is called and when it is called. And we have also seen about render. But we are yet to explore this method, that is get derived state from props. What happens in case of updating or in the updating phase? In this case, also, we use set state function to update our state variable. And when the state variables are updated, the JSX code along with the updated variable is again re-rendered. And between these things, between the updation and the rendering, this get derived state from props is called. Again, we will be seeing how this method is called in case of updation. So this method is called during the mounting phase, when we have already called the constructor after the calling of the constructor, this particular method is called. Similarly, in the updating phase, when we are done with the updation of a state variable, this method is called. So let's understand this method in a better way. So over here in this slide, you can clearly see that there is some text written over here. So let's understand what this text has to offer. So get derived state from props. We can clearly see that no, actually this is the second one. For the first one, you should refer the live session that we have done yesterday at the same time. So in today's session, we are going to discuss about these two methods. In the last session, we have already discussed about the three important lifecycle methods, that is component did mount, component will unmount, and component did update. So you should refer to the last video and then continue with this one, or you can continue with this one for now because this is not much dependent to the previous one. So this is the method about which I'm going to discuss today, that is the get derived state from props. So over here, if you go through the text once, everything will be clear to you. So get derived state from props is invoked right before calling the render method, both on the initial mount and on the subsequent updates. So let's understand what this line means. For that, we have to move to the previous slide. So over here in this slide, I have already mentioned to you all that when the initial rendering is done, that is after the mounting is in the mounting phase, when the constructor is called and the first rendering is done, this method is called once. Again, when any updation is done using this function, that is set state, this method is called. So it's as simple as that. So it is quite clear that this function is invoked both on initial mount and subsequent updates. It should return an object to update the state. So this function is preferred to return an object to update a state variable, or null to update nothing. So now let's understand what this line has to say. So whenever we are using this get derived state from props, we are going to return inside this function either an object in which we will define key value pairs, or we will return null if we don't want to update our state. So now let's read this line. The method exists for rare use cases where the state depends on the changes in props over time. So this is a very interesting line which has been written over here. Let's understand this. So we can update our state with the help of props. So if I have a parent component and if I pass a particular value to my child component as props, then using this props, I can update the state variable that is associated to the child component. I hope that by now you have got an idea about what I am saying. So from the parent component, if you share something to the child component using prop chaining, then using the props, we can update the state variable that is associated to the child component. Now let's do some implementation to have a better understanding. Let's remove this let's get back to our Visual Studio Code and let's do some implementation. So over here, I am going to implement class components. So let's start with the implementation. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to define a constructor. Inside this, to access the this keyword, I'm going to use super. Then I'm going to define a state variable inside this. Counter. For now, I am using counter to demonstrate my method. That is this get derived state from props. So we are going to implement this method first. That is the get derived state from props. So let's start with the implementation. So over here, I have defined the constructor. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to implement a button over here to make some changes to my counter. On click event, something should happen. So this function should get triggered, which I am defining within the curly braces. So I am implementing an arrow function over here. This dot set state, within which I have to set my counter to this dot state dot counter. Finally, I'm going to right click on the button and I'm going to close my button tag. So I have implemented the button over here. On click on the button, what happens is the counter that I have used over here as a state variable should increment. So I need to add a +1 to my already existing state to increase my state by 1. So this is done. I have implemented the button over here and I am increasing the state variable, that is counter. So let's see whether it's working fine or not. For that, div this dot state dot counter I have to write. Now I'm going to close this division tag. Save it. Let's get back to the browser. Let's see whether it's working. Yes, the counter is increasing and we can see this. Now let's proceed with our implementation of the function. So for that, I have to define a sub app component. So let's first define this. I have already imported sub app from components/subapp because I have created the file subapp.js within components. So let's implement this. Sub app extends react.component, and I'm going to implement this class component over here. Over here, I'm going to import React use state from React. Finally, now I have to implement my sub app. So first, let's export this to access this in other part or other files. So for that, export default subapp. Now let's get back to app.js, and I'm importing this so I can access that component over here. Finally, I am going to implement the render function, within which I am going to return certain JSX code, that is division slash, I have to close this, and finally within this I will write sub app. Let's save it. Let's get back to the app component and let's use it over here. Sub app. Let's see. So here sub app is visible. It means that we were finally able to successfully use sub app component inside my app component. Okay. Now finally what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to pass this state variable, that is counter, as a prop to the element or to the sub app file or component. Let's see. So over here I'm going to pass this as data, and finally within which I'm going to write this dot state dot counter. So I am able to pass my counter state variable to this sub app component. Finally, in this component, what I'm going to do is, instead of writing only sub app, I'm going to also mention this dot props dot so for that, let's get back over here. Let's implement the constructor first, and within which I am going to use super for now, and I'm going to define a state variable. This dot state dot or equals, within which I'm going to mention the child counter, or I am going to use the state variable as child counter, and I'm going to initialize this to 0. So over here dot data. Now let's see. Let's get back over here. You click on it, you can see that both of these values changes on clicking. So why this is happening, let's understand. So over here, if we get back to app component, we have used a state variable counter over here. Inside the constructor, it is best preferred to initialize your state variable. So I have also done the same. I have initialized my state variable counter inside my constructor. After that, in the render method, I have used a return statement to return certain JSX, isn't it? First, I have enclosed within this division React Lifecycle methods. After that, I have rendered the state variable, that is counter, within the division tag. Then finally, I have imported a custom component inside my app component, to which I have passed the state variable counter as a prop. And I can access this particular value inside my subapp component using props.data. Finally, I have used a button. On click of this button, what happens is this function is triggered, and thus the counter value which is currently associated to this state variable, or the value that is associated to this counter state variable, gets increased on clicking of this button each time, okay, by 1. So now this dot state dot counter is passed as a prop. So once I am using this dot state dot counter over here enclosed by the division tag, again I am using this inside the subapp component also, just by using this dot prop dot data, because I can access the value using props dot data. So that's why you can see over here that both the values are same, because this is the counter variable, state variable, that I am rendering using in the app component, and over here I am using this inside my child component, that is subapp component, just by using props.data. So we have got an understanding about how we can pass data or state variables from a parent component to the child component. Now let's see how we can implement this particular function, that is get derived state from props. So this is a static function. So I will mention static before it. After that, I have to mention get derived state from props. So I have mentioned that. So I mentioned this method over here, that is get derived state from props. Now let's see how this method works. For that, I have to return something first of all. First, I'm going to do console.log, and over here I'm going to log get derived state from props. And as over here, I cannot implement this dot props dot data. So what I can do over here is, let's see. Over here I am logging get derived state from props. Along with that, I have to return something. Let's understand what. So I'm going to update the state variable, that is child counter, which is associated with subapp. And to this, I'm going to assign the value that I have sent using props to this child component. Props.data into 2. And finally, over here, I'm going to use this dot child counter, this dot state dot child count. And as I'm returning a object, so I will use this. Over here, I have to define props and state. Now let's get back over here. Let's reload this and let's click. You can see that whatever the value is being rendered over here, twice that value is always rendered over here. So let's see again. If I render over here 5, I can see that the value that is rendered over here is 10. Again, if I click on this, if the value is 6, then the value that is rendered over here is 12. Again, if I click, again, it is twice of 7. So let's understand what is happening over here. Okay. So let's get back to the code. Over here, if I inspect app component, so there is a constructor, and within that I'm using super, why, to access this. And I have defined a state variable over here, and I've initialized this variable to 0 inside my constructor. This is quite clear. About this, I have also discussed with you all in the previous video. In the render method, what happens is I am returning something, a JSX. Simply, it's a JSX code. Within the division, I have enclosed this entire piece of code. The first division is the title, that is React Lifecycle method. The second one is the state variable that is associated to this app component. This is this counter. I am just rendering that. And similarly, I have used a custom component, that is sub app, to which I am passing the counter state variable as a prop. Okay, so you can pass props in this fashion. And also, I have implemented a button to which I have associated a particular function on click of this button. Whenever this button gets clicked, the state variable is always increased by 1. This is because the previous state value is changed or updated just by adding 1 to it. Thus, my counter increases on click of the button. And whenever you click, you will see the increase on your browser due to the counter being rendered over here. Whenever you will be clicking, you will be seeing the updated value of counter. And we are passing that updated value of counter over here also within this custom component. Now let's see how we are using this prop value that we are passing inside sub app. So if we move to sub app, we have used a constructor again, and we have defined a state variable with respect to the sub app, and the name of that is child counter, and I have also initialized that to 0. Now let's get back to this render method. So within the render, I have returned a JSX in which I am simply logging the state variable that is associated to this particular sub app. So that is the child counter. Now, as I am rendering this particular JSX, so every time when you click on the button that was implemented inside app, the value associated to the app component increases by 1, but the value that is associated, or the child counter value that is associated to sub app, gets updated to twice the value that is currently set to the counter variable, state variable of the app component. So props.data is nothing but this value that I have passed. Suppose this value is 1, I have passed it as prop. So I can access that value inside this static method get derived state from prop just by using 2 parameters, that is prop and state. And I can easily capture the prop value or the prop that I have passed through the through this custom component easily within this parameter. And finally, I am logging this particular function inside this function. I am logging this function name. Along with that, I am updating the child counter state variable that is associated to sub app. And how am I doing that? Just by returning an object in which the key is the child counter, that is the state variable associated to this, and I'm updating it to the value that is props.data into 2. And for now, as I have passed, according to our discussion, 1 to this as props, so the props.data is 1 now. So when 1 is multiplied to 2, it's 2. Similarly, when I increase the counter value just by clicking on the button to 2, so 2 is passed, and we can capture that 2 using props over here, and then I can access the exact number using props.data, and I can multiply 2 to it, and thus child counter is set to 4. So let's get back over here. Now let's reload. And now if I click as I'm passing 1, so the prop.data is 1 now. It gets multiplied to 2, so it becomes 2. Thus 2 is displayed. Similarly, on clicking again, the previous value was 1, so 1 was added to it, it becomes 2, and then again 2 gets multiplied to it, so it becomes 4. And similar thing is followed for any number that has been obtained by incrementing the previous counter value. And as we are multiplying our child counter or updating our child counter to a value that is props.data into 2, so it will obviously be a multiple of 2 to the counter value. So this is the logic behind this particular function or the lifecycle method. So this method is called during the first rendering, before the first rendering, along with any updation that we are doing, this method will always get called before the rendering in both the cases. That is the first time rendering and any rendering that is happening due to any updation. Before the rendering, this will be called, and we can change our state variable using the props from the parent component just by doing some operation with respect to the prop value. So this is how we can update our child counter or the state variable associated with the child component. So now you have got an idea about how we can use get derived state from props to actually get the prop value from the parent and then updating the state of the current component using the prop value. So by now, this is clear to you all. Now let's understand our next method. So let's get back over here. Now, let's move few slides down over here. Now let's understand this. So over here, you can see that the method name is get snapshot before update. So let's understand this. In this method, it takes previous prop and previous state as a parameter. Okay, this is clear from the syntax. Now what this method does, so get snapshot before update is invoked right before the most recently rendered output is committed to the DOM. So the most recently rendered output, before it is getting rendered or displayed on the DOM, or it is committed to the DOM, before that this is invoked. So it enables your component to capture some information from the DOM before it is potentially changed. So before the updated value is displayed on the DOM, the previous value is captured. So this is the meaning of this particular part. Any value returned by this lifecycle method will be passed as a parameter to the component did update. Now we have already studied about component did update and how we can pass a particular or return a particular value from the get snapshot before update method to this component did update. So we will learn about how to use get snapshot before update and how this method can be used to return a value to component did mount and how we can capture the value inside component did mount. Let's understand. So this is also a very important lifecycle method. So this will be more clear to you all when we will be implementing it. So let's move to the implementation. So I think that you have got an idea about the first method that we have studied. There is no doubt with the first method that we have discussed, that is get derived state from props. Okay, now I'm going to discuss with you all get snapshot before update. Okay, let's understand that. Let's open VS Code. So let's get back to app component. So what I'm going to do over here now, I was passing this particular counter as a prop to my sub app. So let this be like that only. Now let's get back to the sub app. Over here, what we are going to do, I am going to implement this particular method, get snapshot before update. So let's understand how this works and how to implement this. So get snapshot before update. This will receive two values as arguments, so I have to capture them using two parameters. So let's use previous prop and previous state. Okay, and within which I'm going to log the name of this method along with that these two values. And the second one is previous state. Okay, and finally I have to return something. So let's see what happens if we do not return anything. And over here I'm going to use this dot prop dot child counter or data, because I can access the prop using data. So now let's save it. Let's get back over here. Okay. Okay. So here it was expected to be props, but I have mentioned prop over here. So let's see now after correcting what is happening. So if I get back over here, okay, and I click on it, there is something that is written over here. A snapshot value must be returned. So I have to return something from the get snapshot before update. So it's very much required to return some value. So for now, as I am not returning or updating anything, so it's like better to return nothing but null. Now if I save it and I get back over here, I just rephrase it. Now if I click on it, you will see that no warning is being displayed. This is because of the fact that this method needs to return something, either a value or an null value. So over here, for now, I am returning null. And also, I am logging this previous prop and previous state. So whenever an update is happening, before that, this is going to be called. So on clicking of the button, since update is happening, so this will be called before that to get the previous prop and previous state. Now let's understand what is being displayed. So whenever this value becomes 4, so this value 4 is being passed to the child component, that is sub app, and we can access that value using prop.data, which I'm doing over here. So these two values should be same. This one and the value that I have rendered over here, that I have used within this division tags. So these two must be same. But over here, I have also logged this method name and previous prop and previous state. Now let's understand, or let's see how this looks. So you can see that the child counter is always 0, but the data value is 0 first, then 1, then 2, then 3. This is due to the reason that the previous prop is always changing, because the value that I am passing as prop is always changing. Initially it was 0, then after that on clicking of the button it incremented to 1, so then I passed 1, then again 2, then 3. And what is the current value? The current value, if I see, is 4, but the value over here associated to data is 3. So you are now clear that it is showing the previous value. So I can access the previous value using previous prop, or I can capture that. So this is an object. I can further access the value just by writing data after it, dot data. So now I have got an idea about how to capture the previous prop. Now let's see how to use the previous state. For that, let's get back to app component and let's remove this button from here. And let's remove this division also. And for now, I'm going to pass nothing as prop. Let's save it. Now let's get back to app. Over here, you have to implement, and this will be this dot state, because I want to access the child counter now. This dot state dot child counter, because this is the state variable associated to sub app. And after that, let's enclose this within a division tag. And again, over here, I'm going to implement a button. Further, on click of this button, some function should get triggered. And this is nothing but the set state function. I'm going to set the state of the child counter. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to pass an object, that is child counter is set to this dot state dot child counter plus 1. And also within this, I have to mention click. So now I have, instead of implementing the button inside app component, I have implemented this within the sub app component over here. Okay. And also I am rendering this child counter, that is the state variable associated to sub app component. Now let's see what is happening. Let's save it. Let's get back over here. Now let's click on this. Okay, let's get back over here. This dot set state child counter, save it. Child counter is 0 over here. I am just exporting this, and finally over here I am using sub app. Save this, get back over here, and let's click on this. So over here, this should be used with component did mount. Okay, so one more thing that I need to do over here, That is, I should implement component did mount. Component did mount. And finally, over here, I know that there are three parameters that we use in component did mount. The first one is prop. The next one is state. And the last one is snapshot. Now finally, I'm going to log snapshot over here. And over here, I am going to return something. So what I'm going to return is previous state dot child counter into 10. Now let's save this. Okay. For now, let's remove these two things. We will understand them. Let's get back over here. On click. Okay. So let's get back over here. On CLICK. So I forgot to save it. On click. Now I think this should work fine. So the values are increasing, we can see. And over here, now let's uncomment this. Let's get back over here. So the values are increasing, and over here should be used the component did update. Should be used with component did update. It will be my bad. Now let's save. How can I use component did mount? So let's get back over here. Now you can see that the values are, the first one is 0, then the second one is 10, and the third one is 20, and then 30, then 40. But over here I'm using 5. So let's get back to the code. And the last value, over here the sub app has 5, but over here you can see there is 40 only. So let's understand why. So in the app component, it's quite simple and plain. There is nothing implemented. I have just used the sub app component inside my app component. That is as simple as that. And nothing extra has been implemented in the app component. But let's get back to the sub app component now. Inside the sub app component, you can see that I am using a state variable that is child counter, and that is assigned a value 0. And also over here inside the return, I am just using this dot state dot child counter, that is this particular state variable, and I am also increasing this state variable using set state, and I'm assigning it a value to the current value plus 1. So every time I'm clicking, the value increases by 1. So the current value that is over here, you can see, is now 5 because I have clicked it 5 times. But the value that I can see over here, the number that I can see over here on the console is 40. So why is this? This is because the previous state is an object that has child counter assigned to 1 less than the current child counter value. So if the current child counter is 5, then the previous state is having 4. And that 4 over here can be accessed using previous state.child counter, because the previous state contains an object. From that, I am extracting the child counter value and I am multiplying that to 10. And I am returning the value. So I am returning 40 over here. And 40 is captured as a snapshot inside component did update, which is further logged. So whenever there is an updation happening to any of the state variables, this is called first, that is get snapshot before update. And just after that, when the updation is done, then component did update is called, and we can capture the previous value in the snapshot, which I can log over here. So you can understand it quite well now that before updation, this one is called, then the updation happens, then after updation, I can also get access to the previous value just by using this snapshot parameter inside component did update. So we are now clear with how to implement both of the functions, that is get derived state from props and get snapshot before update. Both of them are quite clear to you all now. So if I talk about get derived state from props, so you have seen in this flowchart that this particular function or the method is called before rendering, both in mounting and updating phase. Okay, but if I talk about this one, that is get snapshot before update, this function is called before the updation, and when the updation is done, if I use a component did update, I can access the value that was present in the previous state. The previous state values can be accessed or captured. So by now you are clear with both these methods, and also we have discussed in previous video other 3 important lifecycle component lifecycle methods. So I think that this had been helpful to you all. Now one thing I would like to mention over here, as you have seen while building, while showing you the demonstration, I have got an error. The error was nowhere but was only in this case where I have used the on click event. So instead of using on click, I have wrote something else. So I will suggest you all that you go by the suggestions that are provided to you by VS Code to avoid such errors in first case. And always, if you get the error, you try to save these files again. In that case, if you save these files in the browser console, it will prompt you with the error. Initially, it was showing that get snapshot should be used with component in mind, but I have implemented both. Then also I was getting the error. But when I saved it again, I clearly saw over here that I have written on CILCK, but it should be click. So you should use this particular techniques. That is, whenever you are writing a code, you save it. Along with that, and then you try to see your output on the browser. Along with that, you try to take the auto suggestions that are provided by VS Code. And error is not something that we should shy away from, but we should learn how to remove them in or as fast as possible. So I hope that this video have been helpful to you all, in which I have discussed all these life cycle methods. I have already covered 5. In the upcoming video, I will cover 2 more. To have an understanding on them, I would request you all to go through these 2 videos to have a better understanding. Till then, stay tuned. Along with that, subscribe our web development channel. Thank you for watching this video and being with me.